Continuing on the blog here in our summertime video posts, today I want to talk about evaluating your life in our different areas of well-being, the 5 areas, intellectual, moral, physical, emotional, and aesthetic, and also everyday living. Evaluating your life over a decade, the decades of life, and seeing what changes we can make and why we need to make changes. This talk is, these reflections are sort of in reaction to a lot of talk and a lot of discussion we hear all the time nowadays about taking control of your life, living a better life, putting certain goals in place, and a lot of other similar, what I would call fluffy talk. What does all of this mean? What is all of this fluffy talk doing for anyone? I'd argue it's all a lot of fluff that doesn't add up to anything and doesn't change anyone's life for good or bad, because for various reasons that I'll explain in this discussion. But at minimum, a meaningful change in one's life takes a lot of time to stably achieve. Working through the change takes time. Understanding why exactly you need to change takes time, and understanding that with full level of thoroughness and sincerity. Sincerely wishing to change takes time to arrive at a mental condition where you see the need for the change and you sincerely see the need for the change. That takes time. And of course, probably what takes the most time of all might be actually implementing and maintaining the change over a long period of time. So all of this, as we said, takes time, and much more than a few days or weeks or months. So that's sort of point one. And I think that the importance of point one is that a lot of discussion nowadays, or plans to changing your life or putting goals in place, are much too short term. They're much 10-week plans or 8-week plans or even half-year plans or 3-month clinics, whatever. It's just not enough to understand the need for the change and to work through it mentally, thoroughly, and actually implement. So it's not enough time. But beyond the time aspect, change in life also requires you to honestly evaluate your life over a rather long period of time and see what areas are decent, what are okay, what are trending in the right direction, what areas are not trending in the right direction, what is lacking, what is deficient, and all of the rest. The point of doing this over a long period of time, evaluating your life over long periods, is that you don't want to be reacting to every single little blip in the radar. You don't want to be reacting to those very short-term trends. You want to be reacting to long-term trends, dominant habits, and clear trending tendencies in your life that you'll see over decades. What I would argue a decade would be the best time. And so I think, as I want to discuss in the rest of this talk, is the decade approach to life seems the best. It's sort of senseless to use a day or a week or a month, because it's just not enough time for most of these issues to play out and for you to see the consequences of bad decisions over that short of a time period. And so I think it's good to get into a habit of thinking your life in terms of decades. So how many do you have? You've probably got 8, maybe, if you're healthy. And the first few, I would argue, don't really count, because you have very little freedom. You're still a little baby, or you're going to school, and you have little or no experience of life. You're not really providing for yourself. First 2 decades, you're sort of entirely under the dominion of your parents, and you have no money, no place of your own, and no freedom in what to do. No real choice in even really who your friends are going to be, not much. And so I think life usually begins in your early 20s, but for more and more of us, I think, in our early 30s, because education schedules and high-pressure jobs take up so much time out of your early 20s and infuse it with so much unnecessary garbage stress. So that kind of wipes out your 20s, too. For many people, you see a lot of people staying in school well into their late 20s or even early 30s now, and again, being in school, being in that process, it really does make really hard to say you're fully in control and living life when you're sort of reacting to homework and studying for tests constantly and on a very regimented schedule like school offers. So beginning at 30 nowadays, I think from a lot of us, you've got a good 5 decades to play out your life, and that's probably it. Maybe you get to 90 or 100, but probably if you live to 80, you should at least say that's good. I made it to 80. I'm happy with that. If I get a couple more decades, that's icing on the cake. I don't think you should really plan for that. And so if you evaluate your life beyond a decade, I think it's too distant to go back 25 years or 20 years. You don't really resemble that person enough for things to matter, or for you to see things that matter. The problems, issues, and concerns are probably of those times are probably not alive, or they're not alive in the same form, so you can't really see them. So I think it's the decade evaluation of life is ideal. Shorter, as I explained earlier, is just too subject to random fluctuations. So what you want to do is, I think, evaluate the past decades in terms of achievements. That's a key point. Evaluate your life, because this is a mental exercise that's supposed to help you. And so to do that, I think you need to evaluate, looking back over the last 10 years of your life, the last decade, evaluate in terms of achievements in the various areas of well-being. Again, intellectual, moral, physical, emotional, aesthetic, and everyday living, and see what achievements there have been. Determine where you're trending in each area, and determine where you want to be in terms of achievements in 10 years and how you're going to get there. And all of this has to happen in a brutally honest fashion. You have to ask yourself brutally honest questions, or else the entire exercise is going to be too vague and too pointless and too lenient on the self to be of any use. So you have to ask yourself in a brutally honest fashion, what have I achieved, for example, intellectually in the past 10 years? What have I written that I would be proud to represent as the intellectual accomplishment of the past 10 years? What truths about life have I accumulated over this period of time that I can articulate convincingly and powerfully to other people? Is my intellectual life simply a matter of reading a few newspapers or websites, reacting to them, reading them quickly, maybe putting a link on Facebook, and that's it? Because if you're doing that, I would argue you're really more reacting to others' ideas rather than having a vibrant intellectual life of your own. Similarly, in the physical realm, the physical condition of your body and the active nature of your life or lack thereof, ask yourself brutally honest questions about what physical condition you're in. Now, thankfully, in this realm, there's some objective data, heart rates and weight, blood, BMI, levels of muscle you have, ability to run or cycle or swim in a certain time, how winded you become in doing simple physical activities, going upstairs. There's a lot of numerical data that can help you in this realm to assess performance and how you're doing. But you can ask yourself, can I do physical activities as well as I used to be able to do them? Has the drop-off been severe, or has it just been a gradual one associated with aging? Or conversely, has my physical condition really improved? And again, what can I point to that would validate that belief? Is there certain, numerical metrics I've hit, running a mile in a certain time, competing in certain races and performing in them, or weight loss or any other indica of physical fitness that you could use? Continuing on with moral, you could ask yourself very point-blank questions. What is guiding my behavior on a daily basis? Do I live up to my commitments generally? Do I care about others and show that I care about them through my actions? Do my actions reveal a concern with sort of the moral realm at all? This would be an important question here. Do my actions even touch the moral sphere of life? Or do my actions reveal predominant day-to-day concern strictly with simple comfort, security, and safety of my body and property and reputation, which I would argue, if that's motivating you, you're not even in the moral zone generally in life. So for these 5 areas of well-being, for each area you can determine if the past decade saw any meaningful achievement within that area. Again, the key emphasis or stress here is that one not be vague or dishonest with oneself because then you've taken an exercise here that can be very rewarding and life-changing and behavior-changing, and you've basically made it worthless by being so vague and dishonest with yourself about how you're doing in these areas. Try to list out specific achievements and specific failures. If there were no or very few achievements within any area, try to determine what caused that, what impeded achievement, what caused failure in that area. Again, don't be vague. List specific causes or impediments. For example, you could say I didn't have any good romantic relationships because I was working all the time, or I wasn't ready to settle down, or I was too picky, or I rubbed people the wrong way, or I preferred hookups. Or you could say I didn't have career success because I had a gambling problem, or I had marital issues, or I was a very, very poor match. My talents and personality and skill set was a very, very poor match for my chosen career, so therefore I didn't have any career success. Or you could say you could evaluate your life and say I didn't have any deep driving passion, and so sort of my emotional life was pretty flat, and that was because I always dabbled in everything and I never sort of had a concentrated focus on anything that became a driving passion. Or you could determine that you got bored with life because you always did the same few limited activities over and over and over again, hundreds of times, maybe even thousands of times. You spent Friday and Saturday night always at the bars just looking to pick up women and sitting there aimlessly with a beer in your hand and looking around to see if people thought you were cool. You did those kinds of things repetitively, and so you got bored with life because frankly that activity is not very interesting to do on a repetitive basis. Or you became emotionally callous by becoming a pure ego-driven hedonist that didn't give a damn about anything or anyone on the planet as long as the person got their dose of pleasure from whatever source for the day, and so thereby became emotionally callous to what was happening to everyone around them. So these are examples of ways that you could not only determine failure, or well, in this area we focused on failure, but you could determine failure, but you could also determine the causes and specific causes of failure, and so put yourself in a better position for achievement in those areas. So I would argue that this is a useful exercise if done well, looking back over the course of a decade of life and planning for the next decade. And I think since your life and your environment keeps changing, it's good to do this sort of once a year and look back on the prior decade. Now you've got one more year of if you redo it after year one, year two, you have another year of things that you can assess. But you can probably use last year's analysis as a starting point, and you can identify new impediments and new areas where you've succeeded or you're trending in the right direction, new areas where you failed, new methods of reaching probably some of the same goals and excellences. And so this can become, for every year, sort of a tool to look back on the past decade and gain in this kind of self-reflective exercise. So that's it for today.